Dark comedy, drug-induced madness and mayhem, all infused with bits of graphic horror. If that sounds like something you're interested in, stick around after the intro. What's up, everybody? My name is Brad, and today I'm back with another book review for you guys. If you happen to be new to the channel, I read a lot of indie and small press horror, a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of sci-fi. If that sounds like something you're interested in, please consider hitting the subscribe button down below. Check out some of the other videos on the channel, and maybe you'll come across something that you enjoy. But for today's book review, we're going to be talking about Drop by H.D. Kirkland III. This was sent to me by HD for review consideration. It says it's from Night Rider Press, and he did sign it for me, which is awesome. So there's the tagline on the front, and I want to read this quote on the inside that sort of lets you know a little bit sort of what you're in for when you read this book. Fear can entice strange madness, and the unknown is a sure way to invite it in. That's the tagline there on the front. And then the quote here on the inside: between the conception and the creation, between the emotion and the response, falls the shadow. And that was by T.S. Eliot. So on the back here, it's listed as it's described as a psychological thriller. For me, when I was doing my written review, I wrote down one word, and that was psychedelic. And then I stared at the blank white screen, just that one word, and I couldn't really think of how else to describe it. This book, Drop, it doesn't fit perfectly into a little box. It breaks through the normal genre barriers, and it's its own, beast of a book. So I was sitting there, I was pondering, how can I describe this book to people? How can I maybe entice other readers to pick it up and give it a try for themselves? Like I said at the beginning, before the intro, it's part dark comedy, it's part bad acid trip flashback, and it's part just this gruesome violence and horror all mixed up together. It feels like sort of the book is broken up into three distinct acts. Even though the book isn't formatted that way, that's sort of how it felt to me. Act 1 being the dark comedy, Act 2 being the trippy, just crazy acid trip, and then book 3 is when the real horror and gruesomeness and violence, all that stuff comes into play. So for me, it sort of felt like this book was broken up into 3 acts. So that's how I'm going to break it down for the review. Act 1, if you will, the beginning of the book, is this dark comedy. We're introduced to this group of teenagers, and their plans are they're going to get some acid. They're going to head out to the woods and get high and trip and hallucinate or whatever. I really enjoyed the back and forth banter between the teenagers. It felt comedic and natural, and the main character was sort of in his head throughout the book, and I can't remember his name. I don't even know if it said his name. I'm sure it did at some point. But anyway, we're in this one character's head, and we sort of, he's thinking about other times he's been high and like going to the gas station, and the floor sort of feels like jello, and he's just completely out of it. There was a funny scene involving him and this old woman and their cars, which was quite funny. But all that dark comedic stuff really sort of went to, the escalation of the horror. Once they get to the drug dealer's house, the whole vibe of the book, the whole tone of the book starts to shift. There's something off. There's something wrong here. Kirkland does a great job of escalating the tension and this lingering sense of dread from there on out. As the reader, you can sense that there's something wrong, sense that something wicked this way comes, but you can't quite put your finger on it. You just have this sense that something bad is going to happen to these kids. So Act 2, sort of the middle section of the book, is this bad acid trip flashback that Kirkland lays out for us on the page. I think it felt longer than it actually was. It's only about 2 chapters long. I think it's called The Prophetic Trip, and the trip continues. It might be around 50 pages or so. But for me, this section, it was dense. It was sort of hard to get through. And I'll be honest, at times, I think that the themes and deeper meanings that Kirkland was going for and wanting to explore in this section just sort of went over my head. But it is a bad acid trip, so it's just balls to the wall insanity, mayhem, madness, craziness. I'm not sure if this was Kirkland's intention to sort of write the section this way, but it did come across, at least to me, it was confusing at times. Other times it felt sort of fractured when we're jumping back and forth from these extreme hallucinations. It sort of felt like us, the reader, were looking into the shattered mirror, and each shard was reflecting its own irrational realm. But once you get past all the crazy trippiness, the giant yellow frog, the floating dragon, these cosmic entities, I think what it boiled down to, what Kirkland was wanting to explore, was sort of themes of good and evil, right and wrong, gods and demons, and these philosophical themes and questions that were all explored through this conduit of this bad trip. For this section, I would suggest you read this slowly, let it sink in, just ingest this part slowly. I think you'll get more out of it than if you're trying to speed read through it, because if you speed read through this section, you're probably going to end up lost and confused and just not know what the hell is going on. So read this slowly, let it sink in, just sort of ponder and think about the deeper meanings behind all the craziness that Kirkland is wanting to explore here. So Act 3 for me, the final section of the book, was definitely the most enjoyable for me. The teenagers are finally out in the woods. They get high on acid. They're starting to trip and hallucinate. And nearby, there's sort of this old cemetery that dates back to the Civil War era. There's about 4 or 5 graves out there. They head out there, and this story is told about how these graves came to be, this sort of Civil War flashback. And that was probably my favorite section out of the entire book. It was graphic and brutal and violent, and I could have read a whole other book or novella just on that story alone. And I think that's a testament to Kirkland's writing. Even though sort of the middle section, when they were tripping on acid, it was a bit dense and hard for me to get through, I still really enjoyed his writing overall. Just the subject material for that particular section just was a bit hard for me to understand and comprehend. But that doesn't mean that he's not a really skilled writer. But back to sort of the final section, the kids they're traipsing back to sort of their campsite from the cemetery, and then just these feelings of paranoia and claustrophobia and isolation all start to insidiously worm their way into their minds, and it all leads up to this sort of brutal and shocking finale that I really enjoyed. It was a horrific ending to the book, and it raised a question as well, and the question is evil an entity lurking dormant within us all, waiting to crumble our defensive mental walls and seize control? Or is evil an outside force attempting to deceive and slither its way into our psyche to root out and destroy the good? So in closing, Drop, it was psychedelic, trippy, mind-melting hallucinations saturated with bits of gruesome horror. Drop by H.D. Kirkland III is a concoction of genres blended together and distilled down into a potent drop of wild, imaginative storytelling. Like I said, though at times I felt sort of lost and confused, I was pulled through this hallucinatory haze by Kirkland's prose. It never led me astray. I really, really enjoyed the writing, even though, like I said, at times the subject matter was confusing, at least for me. I thoroughly enjoyed his writing. I can't wait to see what Kirkland does in the future. I don't think I can recommend this book to everyone. It's definitely not for everyone. It's not an easy read. But if you are enticed by this sort of drug-induced madness, splashed with bits of horror throughout the book. You know, also dealing with sort of deeper themes of good and evil, right and wrong, and that sort of thing. I definitely suggest you give Drop a try. For me, I gave it 3.5 stars, rounded up to 4 for Amazon and Goodreads. It was a thoroughly enjoyable read. I really enjoyed Kirkland's storytelling and his prose. And I definitely think you should check it out. Also, I wanted to mention that my buddy Chris from, I think his channel name is just Chris in the Basement now, he actually did an interview with Kirkland on his channel. It's all talking about, you know, sort of the conception and the ideas and things going into writing this book. And I'll link it below down in the description. Definitely read the book first if you can get your hands on it, and then go check out the interview. I think it gives a lot of insight and sort of behind the scenes into what went on, all, you know, inspiring this book here. It's a great interview, both on Chris's part and from HD's part. But that's all I have for you guys today. Again, this has been my 3.5 star review of Drop by HD Kirkland III. It's super trippy and just wild and imaginative, but those bits of horror are in there, so I think horror readers will really enjoy this one, even though it is labeled as psychological thriller. As I said at the beginning, you really can't put this one into a certain genre box. It's its own creature, it's its own beast, and I did really enjoy it. So thanks to HD for sending this along my way. I really appreciate it. But that's all I have for you guys today, so thank you all for spending your time with me. Again, my name is Brad, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.